Hi, I'm Eyal Sivan. I'm from Canada. That's the maple leaf in my title slide. So I come from CIBC. CIBC is what a gunner from Nordic described as a super tanker. We were founded the same year that Canada was founded, and that's 150 years ago, right? That's the logo on the bottom right. And the way I wanted to start is I have a Superman T-shirt back in my room, and I didn't know whether to wear the suit or the Superman T-shirt. If it helps you trust me more, just imagine me in a Superman T-shirt and jeans. Okay, I still represent my bank, so I went with the suit. So I'm here to talk about our journey adopting APIs and microservices over the last couple of years. I've been at the center of our integration strategy for about 15 years now at CIBC. And wow, we're going through an amazing phase of change, right? But at the end of the day, this is about getting applications to talk to each other. It's about integration. It's always been about integration. The absolute number one piece of feedback I get when I start presenting this internally is APIs are not new. APIs have been talked about since the 70s. API stands for Application Programming Interface, and it's not this new modern REST JSON thing. It's been around forever. Absolutely true. APIs have been around since software was invented in the 70s, and a lot of banks, as old as ours, still deal with that, right? That's what the phase on the far left is intended to indicate, the monolithic, the dreaded monolithic big ball of mud application, right? That is all about proprietary interfaces. It's all about old school stuff. You get the systems to talk to each other however you can. Whatever thing they publish, that's what you figure out how to talk to, and you end up with this inevitable mess. Like, it works for a while, and then you end up with a mess. Spaghetti, some people call. And then in the 90s and the 2000s, a whole bunch of folks came along, and I kind of skipped this phase because it was pretty terrible, and they offered things called EAI solutions. And they said, give me all your business logic, stick it in this one magical box, and no more spaghetti. Now you just have this big box with a bunch of little things around it. And that, for some people, worked for a little while. I2, Tibco, before they reinvented themselves, web methods. But very quickly, that thing became the spaghetti. The big box in the middle became this unmanageable mess. You didn't know what was going on inside it. So SOA comes along and introduces the notion of the enterprise service bus, right? Along comes the enterprise service bus. You may know this as the enterprise message broker, right? And it is essentially some sort of layer in the middle that separates something called consumers from something called providers. For simple organizations like ours, like a bank, it was all about UI, channels, that side, and data, right? All of our data stores. And we created this interface, this abstraction in the middle. And this is where you really saw the first introduction of the concept of contracts, right? That you said, I'm going to publish an interface, and there's a fixed interface, and as long as I adhere to that interface, whoever's speaking to me doesn't have to worry about what's going on behind it. They just speak to the interface, and we're good. And that worked great for some, right? So a lot of people love saying SOA was a failure and so on. I can honestly raise my hand and say CIBC was one of the very few places where SOA was a success. And part of the reason was we were very, very careful about how we implemented our ESB. We used data power appliances, and the reason we went with appliances was because they were very narrow in their capabilities. There wasn't a heck of a lot you could do with them. They focused on being very, very fast XSLT processors. So by making that choice, we really ensured that a lot of the logic, a lot of the semantic behavior stuff was kept out of the bus and kept at the endpoints where it belonged. And that worked for a while. But guess what? All these different LOBs would say, hey, can you just add some trailing zeros to the end of the message coming through? Or can you just do an if-then statement on the bus? And we'd get in big fights. No, we only do syntax. We don't do semantics. We don't do logic on the ESB. Not a good enough answer. They needed to do this logic, and they still needed to support this contract-based development. So we federated our ESB, and we introduced the notion of the DSB, the Domain Service Bus. What that amounted to practically was the same organization that runs the enterprise service bus ran a farm of data power appliances, and we would work together with different lines of business to operate their own internal bus. And on that bus, we said, do whatever you want. In fact, use a whole separate platform if you want. You want to use something like a Tibco, or you want to use something like a Fuse, or whatever suits your LOB's needs for your domain service bus, no problem. Just make sure when you're talking to other domains, you do it through the ESB and that you respect our protocols and standards at the time, SOAP and XML, because that's all there was. Right? And that worked for a while. And then everything went crazy, right? That's what we're doing here. APIs and microservices, right? Suddenly, this wasn't about cleaning up the spaghetti anymore, right? I heard a comment at another presentation where the question was like, if we had just done SOA the right way, why didn't we think about consumers and stuff? My answer to that would have been, that's not what SOA was for. SOA was for cleaning up the spaghetti, right? You had this mess, and you had to clean up the spaghetti to reduce costs, so you had more reuse and efficiency and one service of record for customers and so on. This API microservice thing is not about reuse, right? This might be an awakening for some of the larger organizations. It's about speed. It's about innovation. It's about being the first one to market with features that your users demand. This is no longer about saving money. This is about being technology leaders and driving innovation. How on earth is a giant 150-year-old company supposed to do that, supposed to move at that speed and compete with Fintechs, compete with technology giants like Google and Apple, and deal with regulators, right? The regulations haven't hit North America yet, but we know they are coming. And a ton of presentations here from the European banks, PSD2, et cetera. They're in the crosshairs. They have to get there by January. How does a giant company do it? So let's jump ahead. I'm not going to do the sales pitch for APIs, right? You're all here. APIs are Lego. You assemble things out of them. You take simple building blocks and make complex stuff out of these building blocks. Everybody gets it at this point. But there's a ton of different ways to build these things. There's a ton of different competing technologies. A big part of what I've been doing over the last little while is going out into the industry and speaking to analysts and saying, what do I use? Who's the leader here? And you know what? There isn't one. The reaction you will get from analysts across the board is either they will not give you a name at all. They'll say, nope, there's no leader. Too volatile. Sorry. Or they'll give you names, but you'll get different names from the different analysts. So it's a volatile market out there. There are no incumbents. In fact, if there are any leaders, they are in the open source community. I'll talk more about that a little later. Because of that volatility, CIBC made a bold choice. We decided to build our framework in-house. Okay, a build posture for a giant bank, for a piece like this, is an unusual move. We know it's an unusual move. Nevertheless, we felt that this was a good time to hedge against a volatile market, and it was a chance to build up a set of internal skills that, frankly, are portable across different technologies. How to design good Swagger interfaces, how to run a DevOps environment, how to design good microservices. Those things are going to be applicable no matter what technology you decide to pick. So that was our decision, and I'm going to elaborate on that and hopefully give you guys some information that you'll find valuable in your own journeys, especially if you're coming from a large company like I am. The first thing I'm going to tell you is establish your guiding principles before you pick your technologies. Okay? Don't think that you can go out and just buy a magic box and it's just going to solve all your problems. It's not going to work. It didn't work in EAI for very long, and it's not going to work this time. You have to think hard about what it is you're really trying to do. So I'm going to quickly go through these. First, embrace agility. Right? I know everybody's sick of the word agile, right? But really, this is about understanding that stuff is going to change a lot, right? You hear things like daily releases, you hear things like continuous improvement. That's really what agile is. I know it's got a lot of kind of fluff that goes with it, but fundamentally that's what it's about. Second principle is open source first. As I said, some of the best tools available, as you've heard from multiple presenters, including Rob, some of the best tools available are in the open source community, and that's just because that's the natural point we are in the market today, right? This is new stuff, and it's not that weird that the best things are being driven by independent developers in the open source community. Democratize development. This is a big one, right? You'll hear guys like Martin Fowler talk about this a lot. Everybody understands that this movement is largely about empowering developers so that they can move faster, so that you can innovate. Democratized development really says, let them pick the technologies that they like the most, right? Don't go to a group that's very productive and effective and gets along and understands their domain and say, yeah, I know you're .NET developers, but we standardize on Node. They'll leave. They'll just leave. So you better position yourself to make them happy, right? Support whatever technology they are comfortable building these things in. Smart apps and dumb pipes, right? Otherwise known as smart endpoints, dumb pipes, another golden quote from Mr. Martin Fowler. That basically says push the logic, the business logic, where it belongs, to the endpoints. Do not rely on a smart pipe that understands all of your business, because chances are it's going to be proprietary, and chances are it's going to grow into this mess of spaghetti. There's tons of good literature on how to do this effectively, but the key message here is do not concentrate that logic into some sort of pipe. Balanced proliferation and standardization. This refers to the scale on the right side of the diagram. Remember I said this isn't about reuse, it's about innovation. That leads to this natural conversation around, well, I'm just going to let these APIs bloom and free market, and thousands of them are going to be, and there's redundant and so on. And again, my large company, a lot of folks who are not familiar with some of this newer stuff will say, wait a minute, that's just going to be a mess. I'm going to have 100 customer services. That's untenable. It's true. You don't want a jungle, right? You don't want too much proliferation. It does turn into the Wild West, right? On the other hand, if you over-standardize and you start to say, oh, this language, this technology, then you end up with analysis paralysis. The developers will not be happy. You will not achieve the agility and speed and the innovation, fundamentally, that you're after. Underneath that is cross-cutting concerns, right? That refers to the things you have to do no matter what. Okay, so even if you support a dozen different languages and 3 different containers and hybrid deployments and so on, you're going to have to deal with cross-cutting concerns for all of these pieces you deploy, and you're going to be very well served to do that in a common way. Again, there's a bit of a balancing act on how you do that, but you don't want to run 10 different log stacks, right? You want to figure out how to standardize those, so that those cross-cutting concerns, so that you can do them in a common way, no matter what stack the developers have chosen to use. And finally, support two-speed or bimodal IT. This is especially important for banks because we're constantly struggling with what CA refers to as the balance between speed and safety. We run your money, right? So you don't want us to lose your money. You don't want us to give up your super confidential credit report, Equifax. So we have to guard those systems, like agility and speed and innovation. Get it on the watch, get on the voice. That is all important, but not at the cost of exposing this critical data in any way. So that means naturally what's going to happen, and there's a lot of literature about this as well, is the lower part of your stack is going to move slower and stick to the 4 releases a year kind of cycle because it's trying to be safe. And closer to the top of the stack where you're doing the UX stuff is going to start moving very, very fast, probably up to daily releases before you know it. So being able to have an architecture that supports both those speeds, very important, especially for a bank. API gateways, right? What a confusing term, right? It took us like 6 months or more to kind of parse what people meant when they said API gateway, and then it's like, wait a minute, Nginx is an API gateway, and this CA thing is an API gateway, but they do not look like the same thing. So what does that mean, right? I'm going to cut through all the research we did and just talk about the approach we decided to take. We went with a layered gateway pattern, right? And the reason that we went with a layered gateway pattern is because of those cross-cutting concerns I mentioned. A centralized gateway is great if you have a ton of legacy and you want to kind of change as little as possible, and you want a whole bunch of connectors out of the box that just kind of make it work. EAI, right, all over again. But make no mistake, this is the smart pipe. This is exactly against the principle that I outlined on the previous slide, at least for us. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the wrong choice for you, but we made a decision up front that it was not the right choice for us. Instead, we went with a layered gateway approach, and that layered gateway approach essentially says you're going to have a bunch of gateways as you come through the call tree. You're going to have a perimeter gateway that deals with certain cross-cutting concerns. You're going to have a domain gateway, which may be implemented as an aggregate dealing with domain-level cross-cutting concerns, and then you're going to have a distributed gateway embedded into every individual microservice that's going to deal with even more concerns. Spreading these cross-cutting concerns out, it is very, very useful. It gives you a great deal of flexibility, right? And it ensures that the microservices you build remain atomic and portable, because all of the stuff they need to run, including the cross-cutting that's built into the gateways, is right there inside the microservice. Okay. So what does our thing do, this API Foundation platform, as we call it? It follows the microservice chassis or MSA chassis pattern that you do see out there in the industry, not that unlike Spring Boot or Drop Wizard. You design a contract. We very much take a contract-first, contract-driven approach. You feed this contract into our framework, and it generates a microservice with a bunch of rails based on what you've said in the contract. You then take that code that you've generated with all the cross-cutting concerns built into it and configurable. You can decide exactly what cross-cutting concerns you want in there, or you want to take out, depending on your scenario. You then open it up and put in your business logic into each of the rails. Like I said, this isn't something we invented. Pivotal's probably closest to this kind of approach. And it absolutely comes with some, oh really? It absolutely comes with some drawbacks, right? The drawback, the major drawback being that you have to support multiple languages if you want to support heterogeneity. So you might think we're crazy. Some people, I kind of thought we were crazy. I got to speed up because of the clock. You might think we're crazy for trying to do this. And I thought we were crazy when we started, but frankly, turns out it's a pretty good piece of kit we built. We went out and gave the thing to a ton of analysts, including our friends here at Nordic. They beat it up. Turns out it's pretty darn good. The Nordic guys liked it. You might not know there's a soft plug for Nordic, that they do these kinds of consulting engagements. We very much enjoyed working with them, so you might want to ask Bill and Simon about working together. But they were really thrilled with what we built. In terms of adopting this, we want to start finding development rock stars who can really run with this thing, right? This is how we want to drive adoption internally, but it's early days. We want to create that free market of APIs that I talked about by creating some sort of internal scoring mechanisms that lets developers rate whether they enjoy using the APIs based on that feedback to drive an internal community that's going to make them better and better. This is what success looks like for us in the next 12 to 18 months, right? APIs are making the bank more efficient internally, right? We want to drive the internal APIs to production, make sure that API adoption is mandated for all projects in a heterogeneous way, that the API marketplace is internal, seeded, and growing. We are doing a centralized marketplace, right? It's all about teasing this stuff apart. The marketplace can be separate and centralized while the rest is federated. Our core API open source framework, we want to see that grow in the public community, right, on GitHub. And finally, we are moving towards this external API adoption to make sure we're ready for regulations and to be upfront with the community, you know, the open banking community. But we want to make sure we do it right. I don't want to make it sound easy, right? We like to put up these slides and say, oh, a piece of cake, right? Our own framework. Not easy. Right? It's a balancing act because you often have a bunch of things that seem separate, but they're very much interdependent. In the case of the API platform, you got API management, which is really about your contracts and the marketplace and making sure you're writing good swaggers, whatever standard you decide to adopt. Microservices is quite different from API management. They're often conflated. Microservices is a specific architectural style using Docker and independent parts and gets into domain-driven design. Not trivial, right? You have to have skilled developers who know how to do it properly. And then, of course, DevOps, right? Very difficult for existing banks to take their ops organization, right? My colleague talked about, we're not ready for AWS, right? I can think of a dozen reasons why your bank is probably saying, we're not ready for AWS. So that's a challenge. But frankly, all these three legs of the stool have to be stood up at the same time. Otherwise, you just end up with a wobbly stool. If you are in the situation where one of these is really strong and the others are weak, you're going to constantly be kind of shoring up the other two. That's normal. Okay? Don't freak out. You don't have to have them going in lockstep, but you should be aware of the interdependence. But it's not just about the platform. It's about the strategy, right? Technology is one piece. I talked a lot about technology today, but it's about culture and structure as well. If this looks like a scary stool to sit on, it is, right? That's exactly what I was going for, was to make you understand that this is a balancing act on top of a balancing act. This is a major shift for all of us. And the sooner you understand the different facets that are involved, the more you'll be able to make the right decisions and take your giant company into this brave new world. I'm going to leave you with one thought. The single most important idea that you have to remember, you see it in every presentation in different forms. Analogies for IT systems are shifting. It used to be all about plumbing and buildings and cities and fixed hard bridges, right? Industrial things. Unchanging. You better nail the spec up front because heaven forbid the bridge collapses. Stuff's changing. IT solutions are now being thought of like living systems, adaptive, evolvable, right? Membranes and cells and molecules have become the dominant metaphors for how these systems are supposed to be assembled. Concepts like complexity and emergence and self-organization, these are now coming from the world of biology into the world of IT. The reason is because we're trying to make systems that are built to change. So if I'm going to leave you with one message, whether you're a bank or any other kind of company, whether you're small or big, when you think of how to build systems today, build for change. Thank you very much for your time, and check out the Light4J framework at the link on your screen. We'd welcome any feedback you guys might have.